All right, so today we're going to deep dive into something that I think a lot of our listeners have probably seen if they look at the crypto markets much at all.
Hmm.
And it can be a little bit confusing, and
Yeah.
that is Bitcoin dominance.
Yeah, Bitcoin dominance. It's kind of a weird metric in a way, but it can be very helpful.
Yeah, and you sent over a really interesting collection of resources to help us kind of get to the bottom of this.
Right. Yeah, we've got that great explainer from University Bitcoin, which kind of lays out the basics, and then a couple of pieces that talk about why this is important.
Okay.
One that you had in your materials, and then another one from CoinMarketCap. And then to round it out, there's that super practical guide from stopsaving.com,
Right.
which talks about how traders actually try to use this in their strategies.
Awesome. Yeah, a really nice kind of well-rounded group of pieces to dig into.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I think our goal today is to really understand, what is Bitcoin dominance?
Mm,
Why does it matter in the crypto world?
right.
How has it changed over time? And then how do traders actually try to use it
Yeah,
and to come away with a solid understanding without getting too lost in the weeds?
exactly.
So let's just jump right in.
Oh,
What is Bitcoin dominance in detail?
yeah. So simply put, Bitcoin dominance is the percentage of the total cryptocurrency market cap that is Bitcoin.
Okay,
So it represents Bitcoin's share of the entire crypto market.
gotcha.
So you take the total value of all Bitcoin in circulation, you divide that by the total value of all cryptocurrencies that exist,
Mm-hmm.
and you express that as a percentage, and that's Bitcoin dominance.
Okay, and so University Bitcoin gave us a snapshot from January of this year, 2025.
Right?
They said that Bitcoin's market cap was around $539 billion,
Yeah.
and that the total crypto market was $1.16 trillion.
Yep.
So if you do a little math there, that gives us a Bitcoin dominance of 46%
Exactly.
at that point in time.
At that specific moment in time.
Right, and
Mm.
it's important to note how those market cap figures are calculated.
Yes, absolutely.
So for Bitcoin, you take the number of coins that are in circulation,
Right.
which is, right now around 19.6 million, headed towards a max of 21 million.
Yep.
And you multiply that by the current price.
That's it.
And so University Bitcoin mentioned a price of about $50,000 per Bitcoin.
Right.
And so at that circulating supply, that would put its total market cap over $1 trillion.
Yeah.
So I think the 539 billion that they were using was maybe from a little bit.
A slightly lower price at that particular snapshot in
Yeah,
January.
exactly. Yeah, it's a moving target.
For sure.
And I think a really key thing to remember right off the bat is that, Bitcoin dominance isn't some measure of intrinsic real value.
Right.
And it doesn't signal a sudden influx of new cash into the crypto space. It's
Exactly.
purely a ratio.
Yeah, it's based on the current supply of coins and the price,
It's
relative measure.
Okay, so now that we kind of have a handle on what this number is,
Right.
the next question is why should anyone care?
Yeah. Why does this matter?
What makes Bitcoin dominance important?
Well, there are a few key reasons. I think all of our sources kind of point to the same things.
Yeah.
First, it's often seen as a measure of overall market sentiment.
Okay.
So a high Bitcoin dominance can suggest that investors are feeling safer holding Bitcoin compared to other cryptocurrencies.
Interesting. Okay.
And this often happens when there's uncertainty in the broader market.
Okay.
Bitcoin being the original and the biggest
Uh-huh.
might be seen as a little bit of a safe haven.
Okay, yeah. So a risk-off kind of sentiment.
Exactly, risk-off sentiment.
Okay.
Now, on the other hand, a lower Bitcoin dominance could suggest that there's a greater appetite for risk.
Mm-hmm.
Investors might be willing to put money into altcoins
Okay.
because they're more excited about the potential of those newer projects.
Gotcha. So a risk-on kind of sentiment.
Exactly, risk on, exactly.
Yeah, that's a helpful way to think about it.
Yeah, kind of a risk-off gauge within the crypto world.
Yeah, cool. And then the material you sent also mentioned asset diversification. Right.
Yeah.
So if Bitcoin dominance is really high,
Mm-hmm.
that might be a signal for investors to consider diversifying a little bit.
Yeah, to spread their holdings into some altcoins.
Exactly.
And then conversely, if the dominance is low, some people might see that as a good time to stock up on Bitcoin.
Interesting. Okay.
Right.
And then CoinMarketCap brought up another really interesting point, which is that you can look at Bitcoin dominance as a measure of market maturity.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point.
So, back in the early days,
Right.
Bitcoin was basically the only game in town.
It was the only cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
So naturally, it was at almost 100% dominance.
Right, exactly.
But as the market has grown and diversified,
Mm-hmm.
we've seen tons of new assets come out offering all sorts of different features and potential uses.
Right.
And so for some people, a declining Bitcoin dominance is actually a sign that the market is becoming more mature and varied.
Okay, so it's not necessarily a bad thing?
Right. Not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that other things are catching up.
Yeah, maybe it means that the ecosystem as a whole is kind of growing up in a way.
Exactly.
Exactly. Okay, that's really interesting. And then from a trader's perspective, StopSaving.com pointed out that Bitcoin dominance is often used to help decide whether to allocate more capital to Bitcoin or to altcoins.
Right. Yeah. It's a big decision for a lot of traders.
Yeah.
If Bitcoin dominance is going up, it could be a sign that Bitcoin is starting to outperform the altcoins. So they might want to shift their money into Bitcoin.
Okay.
But if dominance is falling, that could point to bigger potential gains in the altcoin market.
Gotcha.
So they might move their money there.
Interesting. Okay, so it's kind of like a compass almost to help you figure out where to put your money.
Yeah, it's kind of a guidepost.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so we've talked about what it is. We've talked about why it matters.
Right.
Let's take a look at how this dominance has actually played out historically.
Yeah, let's look back in time.
Yeah.
So as both University Bitcoin and CoinMarketCap pointed out in the very beginning, like back in 2009 when Bitcoin first came out,
Right.
its dominance was essentially 100%
Of course, yeah.
because there were no other cryptocurrencies.
Right.
And even as late as 2013, Bitcoin still held a really strong 94% dominance.
Wow.
And, University Bitcoin mentioned that even with the launch of Ethereum in 2015,
Okay.
Bitcoin's dominance was still pretty high, around 90%.
Wow. So it was really like the king for a long
It
time.
was the undisputed king,
Yeah, and that makes sense because it was the first,
the original.
yeah, the OG.
Exactly.
But then, as all of our sources pointed out, things really started to shift around 2017.
Yeah, 2017 was a pivotal year.
Yeah.
Bitcoin's dominance took a nosedive.
Wow.
It went from a high of 96% in February of 2017
Okay.
down to just 37% by early 2018.
That's huge.
That is a huge drop, yeah.
What happened?
Well, this period was all about the ICO mania.
Okay.
For those listeners who might be newer to crypto,
Yeah.
an ICO is an initial coin offering. It's basically like a crowdfunding campaign for new crypto projects.
Gotcha.
Instead of offering shares in a company,
Mm-hmm.
projects would sell digital tokens to early investors
Okay.
in exchange for Bitcoin or Ethereum or other cryptocurrencies.
Gotcha.
And these tokens would often promise some future utility on the project's platform.
Okay.
It was a way for new projects to raise capital very quickly.
Okay. And so there were just a ton of these ICOs happening in 2017.
There was a flood of new cryptocurrencies and tokens being created.
Wow.
And it generated this massive wave of enthusiasm around altcoins.
Ah, God.
People were super excited about all these new projects.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and CoinMarketCap gave us some really interesting numbers from that period.
Yeah.
They said that the total market cap of the entire crypto market exploded from about $20 billion to $114 billion.
Oh my gosh, that's so much money.
That is a ton of money.
Yeah.
And it shows how powerful these new narratives and use cases were in driving interest and investment.
Yeah, that's really cool. And that's actually when this idea of the flippening started to gain traction.
Oh yeah, the flippening.
Do you remember that?
Of course.
So this is like the idea that Ethereum would eventually surpass Bitcoin in market cap.
That Ethereum would become the new king.
Exactly. Yeah. And obviously that hasn't happened yet.
Not yet.
But it was a big talking point back then.
It was huge.
Yeah. So then what happened after that 2017 peak and the subsequent crash in 2018?
Yeah, so Bitcoin's price fell, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is that its dominance remained pretty low during that bear market.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah, which suggests that even though Bitcoin might have been seen as a safer bet during that initial downturn,
Right.
the overall negative sentiment just kind of dragged everything down.
Right. So it wasn't like everyone was like, oh, let's all go back to Bitcoin now.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
But then things started to turn around a bit in 2019 and 2020.
Okay.
Bitcoin's price and its dominance started to climb again. And it actually reached the 60% to 70% range in the lead up to the 2020 halving.
Okay. And for listeners who might not know,
Right.
the Bitcoin halving is this event that happens roughly every 4 years.
Yeah.
Where the reward for mining new Bitcoins is cut in half.
Cut in half.
And a lot of people believe that this reduction in supply
Mm-hmm.
can have a positive impact on the price.
Right, because it makes Bitcoin more scarce.
Exactly. Yeah.
And we did see Bitcoin's dominance get a bump after the May 2020 halving.
Okay.
It went up to about 66%,
Wow.
but that didn't last very long.
Oh, why not?
Well, the DeFi summer happened.
Oh, right. DeFi,
Yeah.
decentralized finance.
Exactly. And there was this huge surge in popularity of DeFi tokens and platforms.
Right.
And that led to a pretty significant drop in Bitcoin's dominance,
Okay.
down to about 55%.
Gotcha. So all these other tokens were kind of eating away at Bitcoin's market share.
Exactly.
Okay. And then 2021 was another really interesting year.
Oh, yeah. 2021 was wild.
Bitcoin's price went crazy.
It surged incredibly.
Yeah. University Bitcoin said it went up by like 700% since March 2020,
Wow.
which is just insane.
That is insane.
But its dominance didn't really follow suit.
Right. It didn't increase by nearly as much.
Yeah? Why was that?
Well, there was just so much excitement and innovation happening across other parts of the crypto space, especially in DeFi and NFTs.
Okay.
We saw more institutional investors coming in. We even saw celebrities endorsing crypto.
Right.
And so the overall appeal of crypto just broadened way beyond Bitcoin.
Okay.
And as a result, Bitcoin gradually lost market share to these other altcoin sectors. And by January of this year, its dominance was still below 40%.
Wow. So even though the price was skyrocketing, its dominance was actually going down.
Exactly. It shows how these new trends and technologies can really impact where the money flows.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, so we've seen this kind of back and forth with Bitcoin dominance.
Yeah, it's been a roller coaster ride.
Yeah, for sure. And it's obviously been influenced by market sentiment, the emergence of new tech, and just the overall appetite for different types of crypto assets.
Right. It's a complex interplay of factors.
Yeah. So given all that, how do we actually interpret these changes in Bitcoin dominance?
Right. How do we make sense of it all?
Yeah, like what can it tell us about where the market is right now and where it might be going?
Well, there are some generally accepted interpretations.
Okay.
StopSaving.com and University Bitcoin both mention these.
Okay.
So first of all, a rising Bitcoin dominance is often seen as a sign of fear or caution in the market. University Bitcoin said that this often aligns with what's called the Fear and Greed Index.
Okay.
So when investors are feeling scared, they tend to move towards Bitcoin.
Gotcha.
They see it as the safest, most stable option.
Yeah, so it's like a flight to quality, but within crypto.
Exactly, a flight to safety within crypto.
Okay, cool. And then what about when Bitcoin dominance is falling? What does that usually mean?
Well, that can signal the start of what's known as an altcoin season.
Okay, I've definitely heard that term before.
Yeah, it's a popular one.
What does it actually mean, though?
So it's basically a period when a lot of altcoins start to see significant price increases.
Okay.
And not just against the US dollar,
Mm-hmm.
but also against Bitcoin itself.
Okay, so they're outperforming Bitcoin.
Exactly. Yeah, and during these alt seasons, it's really common to see popular altcoins make bigger percentage gains than Bitcoin.
Interesting.
So Bitcoin's overall share of the market cap shrinks.
Okay, and StopSaving.com actually included this really helpful table.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
That kind of summarizes how changes in Bitcoin dominance and Bitcoin's price might correlate with altcoin movements.
Right.
And they were careful to say that, this isn't like a guaranteed outcome or anything.
Of course not. It's crypto.
Right, exactly. But
Okay.
it does give you a framework to think about how these things might be related.
Exactly. It's a lens to view the potential correlations.
Yeah, that's cool.
But it's important to remember that the crypto market is incredibly complex.
Right.
Individual altcoins can behave in very different ways.
Of course.
They might be driven by their own specific news or tech developments or community sentiment.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. So we know what Bitcoin dominance is. We know why it matters. We know how it's changed over time.
Right.
Let's talk about how traders actually use this information.
Yeah, let's get practical.
Okay.
So both University Bitcoin and StopSaving.com emphasize that traders use Bitcoin dominance to get a sense of the overall market sentiment and to identify potential trends and opportunities.
Gotcha.
But it's almost always used in conjunction with other data and technical analysis.
Of course.
It's not like a magic bullet.
Right.
StopSaving.com specifically mentioned that some traders use it as a buy and sell signal.
Okay.
So if they see Bitcoin dominance clearly trending upwards, they might focus on accumulating more Bitcoin
Okay.
because they think it's going to continue to outperform altcoins. But if they see dominance trending downwards, then they might shift their focus to altcoins,
Okay.
hoping to catch those bigger potential gains.
Interesting.
Yeah. And both sources also said that traders use dominance to inform their broader investment decisions.
Okay. So like Whether to favor Bitcoin or altcoins at a particular time.
Exactly. If dominance is increasing, it could suggest a more risk-averse environment where Bitcoin might be a better bet.
Okay.
But if dominance is decreasing, it could signal a more risk-on environment where altcoins might be more attractive.
Gotcha.
It's all about reading the market signals.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then StopSaving.com had this really interesting point about looking at the price charts of individual altcoins against Bitcoin.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point.
So like looking at the Solana Bitcoin chart or the Ethereum Bitcoin chart.
Right.
And this can give you a more nuanced view than just looking at Bitcoin dominance as a whole.
Exactly, because Bitcoin dominance is just an aggregate measure.
Right.
It doesn't tell you how individual altcoins are performing relative to Bitcoin.
Gotcha.
But if you look at those individual trading pairs, you can see whether an altcoin is gaining or losing ground against Bitcoin, regardless of what the overall market is doing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, so it seems like Bitcoin dominance is a helpful tool, but like any tool, it has its limitations.
Absolutely. No tool is perfect.
Right, and we need to keep those limitations in mind when we're using it.
For sure.
So what are some of the things we need to be aware of?
Well, all of our sources mention these limitations.
Okay.
CoinMarketCap specifically said to take Bitcoin dominance with a grain of salt. One issue they raised is that it doesn't account for Bitcoins that have been lost forever.
Oh.
Like those that are stuck in wallets with lost private keys or those that were lost in hacks.
Right.
And these lost coins still contribute to the total circulating supply.
Yeah.
Which can inflate the market cap calculation and therefore the dominance percentage.
Okay, that's a good point because those coins aren't actually participating in the market.
And
They're
that's right.
just kind of out there.
They're just gone.
Yeah. And CoinMarketCap also pointed out that Bitcoin dominance doesn't really reflect the difference in liquidity between Bitcoin and a lot of altcoins.
Oh, right. Yeah, liquidity is a big issue.
Yeah.
So an altcoin might have a high market cap, which would impact the dominance figure.
Right.
But its actual trading volume and the ease with which you can buy or sell large amounts might be way lower than Bitcoin's.
Right.
And this can lead to some altcoins having artificially inflated valuations.
Gotcha. Okay, so we need to be mindful of that.
Definitely.
And then University Bitcoin also brought up the increasing complexity of the crypto ecosystem.
Oh, yeah. That's a huge factor.
Yeah, with all these new types of digital assets coming out.
DeFi tokens, NFTs, and who knows what else is next.
Right.
Bitcoin dominance might not be as effective anymore as a single indicator of the entire market's health and sentiment.
Right. It's kind of like the market is outgrowing this one metric.
Exactly. The crypto world is just becoming so much more multifaceted.
Yeah. And University Bitcoin also emphasized that Bitcoin dominance doesn't actually reflect fundamental real value.
Right. It's just a ratio based on price and circulating supply.
Right.
It doesn't account for all those other factors that can influence market movements.
Yeah, and crucially, both University Bitcoin and CoinMarketCap stress that traders should not rely solely on Bitcoin dominance to make their trading decisions.
Absolutely.
It's just one piece of the puzzle.
One data point among many.
Yeah, a well-rounded trading strategy needs to look at tons of different signals and indicators.
Right. It's about having a holistic view.
Exactly. And then finally, University Bitcoin made this really interesting point about the future of Bitcoin dominance.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
They said that with all these new altcoins coming onto the market, it's very likely that Bitcoin's dominance will continue to decline over the long term.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And as that happens, it might become less and less useful as a reliable indicator for the broader crypto market.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things evolve.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
We've done a deep dive for sure.
Yeah, so to sum it all up, Bitcoin dominance is basically Bitcoin's share of the total crypto market cap. And it can give us insights into market sentiment, whether investors prefer Bitcoin or altcoins, how mature the crypto market is, and how traders use this information to make decisions.
Yep.
But it's not perfect.
Yeah.
It has its limitations, and we need to be aware of those.
Absolutely, especially as the crypto space keeps growing and changing.
Yeah, exactly. Summary.
Thanks. And so on that note, here's a final thought for our listeners.
If I could hit me.
As the crypto market continues to evolve with all this new technology and these new financial applications, how might we come up with entirely new metrics?
Oh, interesting.
That could give us a more holistic and nuanced understanding of the entire decentralized finance ecosystem?
Yeah.
Maybe even moving beyond Bitcoin dominance as that primary benchmark.
That's a really thought-provoking question. Yeah, something to ponder, I think, as you continue to explore this crazy world of crypto.
Definitely. Thanks for diving in with me.
Thanks for being here.